My name is Luke, I am French, I am 26 years old, and I currently live in Australia, Brisbane, since May 2019. I met my girlfriend Mina, who is Japanese origin, 1 month after my arrival in Australia on a strawberry farm where we both work. We worked over there for several months until the health crisis hit the planet. So, no more work on the farm, we have to find something else. At that time, we had two choices. Go back home, and we split up or stick together and try to get through this event on our own. Spoiler, we chose the second solution. We then decided to leave our seasonal job in the countryside to go into town, trying to find a new job. Bingo! Good news for me. An employer has agreed to hire me to work on a local Australian football team. This employer will be named Kathy, anonymity requires. Kathy explains to me that I can work for the football team, but that currently, because of the health crisis, a containment will be mandatory even if at this time Australia is rather spared compared to Europe. Anyway, I'm hired, but I'm going to have to wait until the lockdown passes and the football season resumes. So I explain that it tempts me, but that it will be tense for Mina and me to remain unemployed during the confinement because we have a rent to pay, food, etc. You should know that Kathy has a heart as big as Australia. Sensitive to our situation, she explains that she has a solution for us. She has a holiday home several kilometers from Brisbane that belonged to her father, who is now in a retirement home, where we could stay for free while confinement is in progress. At this time I do not believe it too much. I tell myself that there is something fishy, but in front of the situation. I agree, this is the best solution for us. We accepted this and moved to this house a few days later. Animal Crossing, Splatoon, MK. We enjoyed playing video games during this lockdown, aha. Everything is going well. We feel a little lonely because this house is isolated in the countryside. But apart from that, we are well, we have a garden, etc., all this for free. I also point out that this house is like in the middle of nowhere. I just have a neighbor, John, who takes care of horses I've been friends with, and that's it. Other details that will have their importance. In this house, there is a main entrance door with a large fuzzy glass, so you can distinguish things through, and there is another wooden door behind the house that overlooks a veranda connected to the house. This house is a single story, so there are no floors, and to finish, no curtains at the window except in the bedroom. The context is given. The story begins now. 3 or 4 weeks after I moved in, Kathy calls me with good news. I can go to work. First day of work, everything goes smoothly. I like what I do, very good atmosphere, etc. The only problem is, we're still in Kathy's father's house, which is several miles from Brisbane, and I don't have a car, so I have an hour and a few trains to go, and the same one to come back. But like I said before, I have nothing to complain about. For the record, Mina was still looking for work. She wasn't as lucky as I was, so she was mostly at home while I'm working. Second day of work. Always at the top. 5 p.m. I'm about to finish my job when I get a call from Mina. She whispers, the voice trembling. And you have to know that we communicate in English both, and we are not necessarily bilingual, so sometimes we understand each other half. First second I feel something's wrong. Here I will switch from her point of view to give you a maximum of details. She was quiet playing Animal Crossing on the couch, when suddenly she saw a silhouette through the blurred window of the main entrance door. Too small and too wide for me or even John. And she understands it very quickly. She stares at this figure that is now motionless facing the front door. It is at the moment when she tries to get up to gently walk away from the door that this guy begins to frantically knock on the door. Her heart is racing. She doesn't know what to do. She tries to be as discreet as possible, so this guy thinks that no one is there or will open it to him. She finally decides to hide in the wardrobe of the room, because it is the only room where we cannot see what is happening from the outside. Snuggling between the hangers and our clothes, and praying for him to let go, she suddenly remembers that there is a second door behind the house that is open, and she does not know if it is locked or not. Courageous, she decides to rush through the house to reach this door, and then during her run, she sees this guy sneaking past one of the windows of the kitchen. Conclusion, he goes around to check if there is a door at the back of the house. Panicked but already in her race, she decides to go to the end and try everything for the hole. She must close this door before he tries to open it. It is finally when she presses the latch that she hears the individual trying to push the door. Completely frightened, she goes back to hiding in this wardrobe, and that's when she calls me. As I said earlier, I struggled a little to understand what she was saying to me on the phone. Her voice trembled, etc. But I immediately tried to calm her down so that I could have clear information about what was going on. After a minute, or I ask her to focus on her breathing and listen to me, she calmly describes to me what just happened. I switch to mode. I have to go home as soon as possible while making sure that she is the least in danger. I ask him to stay in that closet and call the police and call me back right away until I get home. Finally, she decided to stay on the phone with me, which is not the best solution. I admit she should have called the police, but I was in a state of total stress, and the fact of having her on the phone and continuous reassured me. I order an Uber, who must have found me super weird besides. I kept asking him to go faster, even to pay more. Aha! After a few minutes I am in my Uber, always with Mina on the phone. She explains to me that she can't hear anything anymore, no one knocking on the door or no one around the house. I don't advise her to move, but finally she motivates herself to take a look out of the wardrobe, to finally a few minutes later confirm to me that the silhouette is no longer visible behind the door and that no one seems to be around the house. I'm in front of my house. I go to meet Mina and give her a big hug by explaining that I'm here. She has nothing to fear. 6 p.m. It's night at this time of year in Australia. I check the locks and try to pass the ideas by playing a game and watching anime. Big mistake. In my relief to rush to find it without problem, I have omitted a detail of the greatest importance. Check around the house. Damn, Luke, why not check around the house? It's time for bed. 1 a.m. The neighbor's horses wake me up. I hear the hooves. Mina, still not really asleep, asks me what is this noise, and I answer that it is the neighbor's horses. 3 a.m. Boom, boom, boom. Someone knocks frantically at the door. From behind this shot, but like super strong, like he's halfway to breaking down the door. I can tell you that I discovered what adrenaline was at that time. I'm sure it's the same guy, and he's been trying to get into this house all along. Mina screams. I start to tremble everywhere. I have this feeling of being paralyzed, but still having so much energy to spend. It's very strange. I get up from bed in order to barricade the back door, and then call the cops. It is at the moment when I leave the room that I hear a deaf and metallic noise. Damn, he opened the damn back door. He's on the porch. So there is only one last door with a poor wooden hold under the small space at the bottom of the door that separates us. And he's still determined to come inside. For me at this moment, it is sure he will enter. Shitty reflex, don't do that. Tea is a bad idea. I'm not much of a fighter. But not the choice. I get the biggest kitchen knife I have. I place myself in an angle that I have the best chance of catching by surprise when he enter. And I'm willing to use that knife to defend us, to defend Mina, who is paralyzed in bed. I'm so scared, but at the same time so much confidence. It's really very, very strange. When suddenly in the midst of her millions of thoughts, Mina screams, "Stop," calls the police. I look at her. She throws my phone at me, and I think that instead of waiting without doing anything, maximizing my chances of staying safe, while waiting for her behind the door, it's a good idea. So, always in the same position, ready to defend myself, I call the police. The phone call must have lasted 40 seconds. The policeman on the phone understood directly that it was serious. He asked me the address and basta they were on their way. At this moment I find myself a little more relieved while staying on the lookout. This is where the individual starts mumbling incomprehensible stuff, which does not reassure me because to the noise that it makes I tell myself that it is either a drunk or drugged guy or a mental patient. He must have figured out I called the cops, but he's still touching the handle and pushing the door. 3H10. I've never been happier to see flashing lights. The cops are here. 4 cops and 1 police dog. When I see them approaching the house, I hear noises behind the door. The individual seems to get scared and gives up. I hear the dog barking, the policeman screaming, and a man moaning. It was over. The individual neutralizes and gets into the car. One of the police officers remained to talk to us and to take our side of the story and find out whether we wanted to file a complaint or not. He told us that there was a chance that this man was a rehab patient who'd run away. He also told us that he was not sure of anything at the time and that they will have to verify his identity, but eventually we never heard from this type or the police. There you go. Australia is a great place. I'm kidding, despite that we have wonderful moments here and nothing similar happened then. It's already way too long, so I'm done here, hoping that this moment of intense life captivated you. Peace. During college, I dated a fairly well-known and talented local musician named Tim. As horrible boyfriends tend to be in the beginning, he was a loving, attentive, charismatic, seemingly normal partner. He made me mixtapes, cooked me my favorite meals, and dedicated songs to me at open mics around town. I, young, foolish, naive, was deeply smitten by his mysterious, dark, artistic allure. However, over the course of our year-long relationship, his mental health severely declined. He had the ability to appear lucid and normal around other people, but in private he began suffering delusions, compulsively lying, and creating art that focused on themes of rape and murder. I was worried sick and his condition was exhausting, but I did my best to be kind, understanding, and supportive. I loved him and believed that he shouldn't have to struggle with his mental illness alone. One time he vanished without a trace for a full day. I found his apartment empty, lights on, front door wide open, phone on his nightstand. I took a few deep breaths and called all around the city for hours before finally discovering he had been involuntarily checked in to a mental hospital. I did my best to be strong for him, seeing him every day during supervised visitation hour, bringing him his favorite books to pass the time, and holding him as he sobbed that it was all a mistake, that he did not belong there. It was surreal to see my gentle, intelligent, normal albeit depressed boyfriend surrounded by visibly insane long-term psych ward patients. For real, the place was like something out of a horror movie. In retrospect, none of the staff ever told me the real reason why he was there, and I was too polite and naive to ask. Our relationship ended a few months later. I found undeniable evidence that he was cheating on me, and, secretly relieved, confronted him. I told him to leave my apartment and never come back. He cracked. The gentle Tim I had known and loved melted away to reveal a new persona with dead, wild animal eyes. He threatened to kill himself with pills unless I took him back, but I was so extremely done that I called the police. They weren't much help, but Tim left. I blocked him everywhere and never contacted him again, but he left me insane voicemails from different numbers for weeks afterwards. I was relatively unshaken, and things returned to normalcy. I graduated and got a sweet job in the same cool college city. 6 months later, I woke up to concerned texts from mutual friends saying that they didn't want to freak me out, but Tim was off his meds, clearly manic, and was posting a newly written song all over social media. His best friend, who hadn't been in touch since before the breakup, sent me an apology along with a screenshot of the lyrics. That got my attention. I won't copy-paste them here because they'll lead back to his Bandcamp, but the song was pretty explicitly about my rape and murder, but in a sort of clever, disguised way. It's catchy too. The bastard. I checked his profiles myself from a friend's account, and he was posting dozens and dozens of totally insane rambling statuses, most of them about me. They flip-flopped between flowery love prose and murder imagery. His friends were reacting with concern, but a few egged him on, probably thinking he was just venting about his ex. I decided it'd be best to continue ignoring him, but I saved screenshots just in case. A few days later, while at work, I looked up from my computer to see Tim enter into the far side of the studio. My blood turned to ice. He was talking to my creative director. It looked cordial enough, and I saw Tim begin to casually scan the studio. I ducked down and bolted into my favorite project manager's office, slammed the door, and unleashed upon her what must have been a nearly unintelligible explanation of what was happening. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. But Nancy was amazing. She understood almost immediately. She snuck me out of the building and drove me in her car to the police station, where I showed officers the screenshots and filed a report. My co-workers later told me that Tim was there to inquire about the open designer position. He is not a designer. He had brought with him a portfolio and an elaborately fabricated work history that sounded legit. At the end of his interview, he casually asked if I still worked there. He said we used to collaborate. Oh, and he had written a song for me, and it had been picked up by local radio this morning. He asked my co-workers to let me know with warmest regards. That phrase still makes my skin crawl. He then left, found my abandoned car in the parking lot, and paced behind it until the police arrived. Unfortunately, he wasn't enough of a public menace for police to bring him in that day, but the incident helped me to secure a restraining order against him. My company was amazing, too. I was deeply embarrassed about my literally insane ex coming to the studio, but the CEO filed trespassing charges against him and created an action plan to keep me safe if it happened again. Not long afterwards, I moved to a different city, and that was that. Haven't heard from him since, but I discovered the most alarming part later. His roommate at the time, Liz, went through a similar experience with him during his breakdown, and when we compared notes much later, she said she had seen a large axe in Tim's car the same week it had all gone down. She said that she was worried about Tim's Facebook activity, so she removed the axe and hid it. Tim was so angry that he completely trashed their house and never came back. And if our timelines are correct, that must have been just before he came into my workplace for his interview. A couple years ago, one of my closest friends relocated cross-country with his long-term girlfriend to work a job he couldn't refuse. Only issue he had was that he did not want to fly his dogs out with him when they made the move, since they'd be staying in a hotel for the first month. He was also a bit reticent to fly them out due to health concerns for both pets. By the time he located a home to rent, he was missing his furry buddies and made the request of his sister, another close friend, and myself to drive them to him in LA. Now we are Chicago folks, so the trip would be a long one. However, with the three of us to foot the near 30-hour drive, it would be a piece of cake. We left early and drove long hours. Along the way, it was decided between my friend and I that we'd foot the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we needed to, we'd let our friend's sister do some driving. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rental agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop very often past an 8-hour stay at a Denver La Quinta Inn. As for the journey itself, it was relatively smooth, barring getting pulled over right before entering Utah for driving for 2 miles in the left lane of an empty highway. Whoops. From that point we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without much trouble until we entered California in need of gas. I had been driving for the majority of the first day and tagged my buddy in after being pulled over. I remained in the shotgun seat as navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop. We kept our eyes peeled for road signs and discovered a sign pointing to Yermo Ghost Town, or something along those lines, which had a mobile station. How wonderful! It was convenient, too, as it was located almost directly off of the interstate. We rolled in on a little more than fumes when we approached the pumps. Normally we let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped not long before then, and with both dogs sleeping snugly in the back, I decided to pump gas without anyone else leaving the vehicle. My buddy pulled us up on the opposite side of a beat-up green sedan with a short, plump gentleman who just turned in to approach the shop. I noticed a few other hoop ties at the pumps, all unoccupied, and there were a couple of other cars parked up near the station, most likely belonging to the employees, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Until I swiped my credit card. The pump rejected my first swipe attempt, which I chalked up to a misread. I swiped again and the pump reads out, "Please see attendant." I was annoyed, but we needed gas. I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was doing and asked if anyone needed anything. After taking their orders for Gatorade and Marlboro Reds, I walked up to the store and make a mental note of how strange this gas station was. Kind of quiet, especially for one right off the interstate, but that's no matter. As I walked in though, more weirdness. First thing I notice is that there are some boxes of chips just left on the floor, like someone was stocking shelves and just quit. As I veered to my right, I noticed that immediately there is no one milling about in this place. With the 6 cars besides my own out there, I felt like I would see someone. Things got even weirder when I realized that there was no one behind the counter. No customers or workers. And then it dawned on me, what had happened to the gentleman who was at the pump adjacent to mine? Surely they can't all be in the bathroom. This is where I begin to feel this gnawing sensation in my stomach. Something isn't right. I have always been a person who felt like I could trust my instincts, and those instincts were screaming at me to just get the hell out. I want to run, but I hold back. I would look suspicious booking it out of a gas station that was empty, and decide to just play it cool. Natural. Don't let your body language let on to how badly you're freaking out in your head. I was probably inside of this gas station for only a couple of minutes when I left, but I stopped just before exiting to listen for something. Anything. A flushing toilet would have been a good sound, but nothing. As I exit the shop and see my car, I begin to feel dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to make it to the end of their trial, but the celebratory fanfare disappears, and in that silence, something comes and strikes them down. I am about 25 yards from the car when I see this gentleman come out from around the side of the shop opposite of me. This is not the same man as I saw while pumping gas. He was larger and had a peculiar look on his face. The best way I could describe it was like Nick Cage's smile from Face/Off before the titular act had occurred. I continued walking towards my car, but when I turned back to look at him, he was now walking towards me with a purpose. At this point, I noped my way back to the car with increased urgency in my step. And of course my friend has the door to the car locked like a complete douche clown. There is also the 95 pounds golden retriever sitting in my seat. Apparently my travel companions did not notice how freaked out I was, or the creepy gentleman still walking in my direction. I punched the window and told him to unlock the fucking door, to which he only half rolls down the window to tell me the dog was in my seat, and they were afraid she'd jump out when I opened the door. I reached my hand in and threw the dog towards the back seat as hard as I could while my friend is just now realizing how freaked out I am. He started the car and drove off quickly. I took one last look back and see Nick Cage had stopped about a pump away from where we were still with that same look on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, this time with a ton of people inside and out. After thoroughly creeping out my friends with the story as I pumped gas, we made our way back to the interstate, which meant passing that gas station again. It's been about 15 minutes since we pulled out initially, and we go silent as we notice that those very same cars are still sitting in the same spots where we had left them. After thoroughly freaking out for a few miles, I received a phone call from my credit card company about a $100 charge at Mobile Station. The lady on the phone was really helpful in fixing the situation for me, and was as entirely creeped out by the situation as we were. In the end, we made it to LA and had a great vacation, but it still bothers me as to what the hell was going on at this little gas station off the highway, and what the hell was that smiling man's story. A friend of mine is on here, and she loves going through all the stories. She wanted to post this one of mine, but conned me into signing up instead. Sadly, I have many stories, but this one was the most traumatic. So, my friends always say that if something unlucky is going to happen, then it will most likely happen to me. They also say that if there is a creeper around, then I will end up being the one creeped on. Both of these statements are, unfortunately, true. I've been stalked multiple times, some ending pretty badly, and I have the worst luck imaginable. This story happened 3 years ago, and I still have nightmares about it. My mother came to stay with me for a week, which I knew would be a nightmare. We can hardly stand to be in the same room as one another, so fighting is inevitable. On her 5th night, here we got into a heated debate about religion, and it somehow tuned into a full-out screaming match. About an hour into the screaming, my app manager knocked on the door. Before I could even apologize, my mother jumps in and says that I had been threatening her. I was so shocked and appalled that it threw me into a mini panic attack. I grabbed my keys from the key rack by the door and took off. It wasn't the wisest thing to do, I know, but I was so frazzled that I didn't know what else to do. I ended up sobbing my eyes out and just driving. This went on and off for about an hour and 70 miles. Driving has always calmed me down, so even after the tears subsided I kept going. About another hour later, I saw an exit for a dam, which surprised me. I had lived here for 2 years, and I had no idea there was a dam anywhere close by. I decided to go take a look, even though it was 3 a.m. and pitch black. I still wasn't ready to head back, and this seemed like a good distraction. It was another 30 miles on a desolate road before I finally reached the dam. It was hard to miss because it was the only light I had seen for those 30 miles. I crossed the dam and saw that there were a couple turns leading to campsites. At this point I also realized that there was a legit lake. Yeah, I know dam equals lake, but I didn't really put the two together. I decided to flip around and go back to a little parking area I had seen near the dam. Once there, I parked and my night took a turn for the terrifying. I parked and proceeded to make one idiotic move after another. I rolled down my windows and could hear the sound of water hitting a shore, but in the light of my headlights, I couldn't see where it was coming from. The mosquitoes were pretty bad, so I rolled my window back up and started fishing around in my back seat for a flashlight that I knew I had somewhere in the car. Then, I remembered that I had it in my trunk. Now for what happens next, please feel free to label me as an idiot. I surely am. I popped the trunk, turned off my car, opened the door, stepped out, closed the door, got the flashlight, closed the trunk, went back to the door A, and it was locked. My doors unlock when you open them, so I have no idea how the door became locked again, but it was, unlike the moron that I am, I still had the key in the ignition. I knew the door should have remained unlocked, so I hadn't really thought about taking the key. Instantly tears started to well up because I knew I hadn't even bothered taking my phone with me. I panicked for a while, but then I remembered the campsites I had seen, and I hoped that maybe someone would be in one, and that they would have a phone I could borrow. I started walking and fretting about waking up some poor stranger in the middle of the night, but I didn't see any other options. Each campsite I came to was completely empty. I think I checked 15 or so before I started to get nervous about how far I was wandering from my car. I think I had to have walked about a mile or so, and on the walk back, my battery started to fade on the flashlight. I was only about halfway back, and my panic reached a whole new level. For whatever reason, the parking area and my car seemed like a safe haven, and I started sprinting. Remember what I said about being a moron with bad luck? Yeah, in my panic and in the darkness I got switched around somewhere and ended up in a dead-end campsite, even though I would have sworn that I was still on the main road. This is when the major tears started. I panicked even more and ended up in yet another campsite. It felt like I was just getting more and more lost, and I couldn't hear the water anymore. So I calmed myself and decided to stay put till morning, which I knew wasn't too far away. I sat down, wrapped my arms around my legs, and proceeded to try rocking myself into calmness. It worked pretty well till I saw him. I had my eyes closed as I rocked, but then I heard a dull footstep. I looked up, obviously startled, and saw him standing only a few feet away. He was massive, probably about 6 feet 4 inches, and had a large but not fat build, like a football player or something. In hindsight, it's amazing that I hadn't heard him approaching sooner, or smelled him. For a second all I could do was stare in horror and gasp out incomprehensible words. Then I screamed. It only took him a second to cross the distance between us, but I didn't even have time to properly get up before he had his hat around my throat, choking me. For reference, I'm not particularly big. 5 feet 3 inches, 132 pounds. Not skinny but not fat either. To him I was nothing more than a little rag doll. I wasn't even sure of what was happening, but I was being jerked around by the neck and arm. His hands were huge, and every place he grasped and pulled felt like he would snap something. When the movement stopped, I was in his lap with my head pressed against his chest, and one of his legs partially crossed over me. He was half cradling me, half grappling me. I was too dazed to make a sound, but when I tried, his hand would tighten over my throat again. I went still for a few moments, but then I felt his tongue against my throat. He smelled rancid, like beer and something decomposing. I struggled to get free again, but this time he pinched my esophagus between his thumb and forefinger. It was light at first, but then he started increasing the pressure. By the time he was done, I felt like I was going to pass out. I don't want to go into too much detail because the memory is still hard to revisit, but he went back to licking, groping, and kissing. It was traumatizing, but he never went for anything too intimate. I gave up on trying to scream or get away, but he would still occasionally choke me. I sat there and simply sobbed. Then, possibly even more disturbing, he started to hum and rock me. I'm not sure why this part bothered me so much, but it did. His voice seemed higher than it should be, and his hum was rather nasally. I don't know how to describe it. Then, just as his humming was becoming almost frantic sounding, I saw headlights and he stopped. Somewhere in the distance, it looked as if a car was heading our way. He also saw it, and I felt panic well up inside of me, worried that he would drag me off somewhere, but he didn't. He simply let me go, stood up, and walked the opposite way into the trees. Without him supporting me, I fell back slightly and watched him walk off. The sun wasn't up fully yet, but there was enough light to make out more of him than I had been able to before. He looked as bad as he smelled: dirty sagged jeans, a white hoodie that was so stained that it looked brownish gray, and medium-length brown matted hair. I didn't see his face at all because I had kept my eyes shut for the entire time he had me. I could hear the car getting closer, and I stood up. About 30 feet away was my flashlight, and where I had been sitting, and I realized how far he had taken me while he pulled me around like doll. I could see the car lights through the trees, but then they suddenly took a left and panic set in again. I worried that he would come back if he saw that the car wasn't coming to this campsite. I started to run. I didn't even care about staying on a path or road, just as long as I could still see the car. I caught myself on a few bushes and scraped myself falling a few times, but the pain didn't even register. I was too desperate to care. It felt like forever, and I don't know how long I actually ran, but I eventually ended up close enough to the car that the couple inside noticed me. They stopped and the guy got out. I remember not even being able to talk. For a long while I was just shrieking at the poor guy. Even before I could tell them what happened, his GF had called the police. Everything after that seems like a blur now. The couple drove to the parking area, as told to do by the cops, just in case the man was still around. The sheriff's department showed up, took my statement, took me to the nearest station, asked for another statement, checked me for evidence, called my mother, and contacted the fire depot to break into my car for me. Just as my mom and friend arrived at the station, a sheriff's car pulled up, and in the back seat was the man. I was promptly pulled back inside and asked to make a positive identification. It wasn't like in the movies, though. They literally just brought him up to me and asked him. Now this part still leaves me extremely emotionally confused, but it is what it is. As I looked up at him, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked ashamed, confused, and oddly vulnerable, and then his eyes started to tear up. I knew something had to be wrong with him mentally, and in a weird way I actually felt some sympathy for him. I did confirm that it was him, but afterwards I actually worried enough about him that I asked about what would happen to him. This is where sympathy flew out the window. He was indeed mentally unstable, as I found out, but he was also a convicted sex offender. Yeah, I actually lucked out with what little had happened to me. Looking back, it seems more like a dream. My mother and friend took me back to my car, and rather than being stuck in a car with my mom, I opted to let her drive my car back, and I rode with my friend. The entire drive back she kept drilling me for more information, but I couldn't bring myself to even talk about it. I still don't like talking about it, and I refuse to ever go camping again. I'm also extremely paranoid about always having my key on me when I step out of my car. Not a funny, haha kind of paranoid, but literally it's now a compulsion to check to make sure I have my key with me. I usually have to check 3 times to satisfy myself.